Well, the USFL lives here today on a Monday, apparently, if you're following Josh Gerben on Twitter. That might be a short for later today. We'll figure all that out. I have a feeling we're going to be having some XFL, USFL news coming out this week. Should be excited, but happy Victory Monday, unless you are a San Francisco 49ers fan. Sorry, Matt Baker or Anthony Miller with the Philadelphia Eagles. Hopefully the Cowboys will follow suit tonight. I know a gentleman here that lived through a riveting Sunday night game last night, which I do want to talk about as it relates to the CFL and this with Jason Hussey. And then Evan, Rams looking good, put the Cardinals to bed. How are we doing today, guys?
I'm doing good, Reed. Thanks for having me as always. And I mean, yeah, my football teams that I cheer for tried to give me a heart attack this weekend, but ultimately I'm still alive.
Yeah, I had tweeted, I think I had put it in the group chat. I said, if the Ticats beat the Lions this weekend, I'm not going to Grey Cup. I can't look at Hussey. I can't look at Hussey in the face. I can't after all the smack talking. Crazy weekend to CFL. We'll get into that. Evan, I thought NFL was good. It was exciting.
Yeah, I mean, NFL really, we're getting into the thick of things with the NFL, whereas the CFL, just wrapped up week 19, really feels like, we're in the last bit of things before the playoffs. So it's two different worlds for sure, but no, I enjoyed the NFL this weekend.
So I wanted to get into that first because obviously we lived through the Bills. Was it the Bills Giants game last night? 14-9, I think was the final score. I was like, "Hey, Mom, let us come over. Like this will be exciting. Like she loves Josh Allen. Like this will be good. We'll go watch the game." But a really, really slow game, right? 6-0 at half, and we had all that kerfuffle and all of that. And these are the games that you always have the CFL people like, oh, this is the no fun league. This is what matters. And I'm curious, Jason, because obviously, and I want to get Evan's thoughts as well. Like, there's many a time when I get a notification on my phone, like Montreal Alouettes at REDBLACKS, game start 0-0. And then I'll get the notification like Montreal Alouettes, whatever, second quarter start 0-0. And I'm like, oh God, like this is, these are not like, Jason, what do you make of that just in terms of like, I mean, it's still a riveting game last night. Like, do you view them the same with the CFL? Like when you get some of these slow games, like how did you view the game last night? I'm curious. I know you're a Bills fan too, but kind of remove that.
Yeah, I mean it was an awful football game, but I just view it as both leagues. Bad football is bad football, and I don't think that I think the CFL, the bad games are more like pointed to because there's only 4 of them on each week, and you have these games not running like concurrently with other games. So I think that they kind of stand out a lot more like a sore thumb. But I think at the end of the day, a bad football game is a bad football game. And the NFL has had lots of bad primetime games the last couple of years.
Yeah, they got to figure that out. And I don't know. I mean, the Bills were super flat against the Jaguars in London. And obviously, like the bye week or the travel and like the Jaguars were there and they didn't have to travel because my mom's sitting there. She's like, I think Josh Allen is, jet lagged. I'm like, the game was last Sunday. I mean, I can't imagine it was. Evan, yeah. What did you make of this? I'm kind of curious.
I mean, in terms of the Bills, like,
just in terms of, I mean, it was very much like what did I say? It reminds me of the Chiefs Broncos from last year. And you said no one wants to. I mean, like it puts these games on a pedestal because it's the CFL because you got 4 games. I mean, these primetime NFL games, but like I think the NFL benefits from having 9 games playing concurrently on a Sunday a lot.
Oh, well, absolutely. I mean, in the CFL with the number of teams, you're always kind of in prime time. You don't. I mean, yeah, you're gonna have games, on like the same day, but usually not at the same time. So, that means you're going to have more eyes concentrating on it if you were following that league. Just like in the NFL, I mean, the contrast, between games that are in prime time and aren't in prime time, so take like one of the games from I guess it's 1:00 Eastern slate, those aren't going to be nearly talked about as much as, Bills Giants, even if, Bills Giants wasn't one of the better games of the day. So yeah.
Just padding a little bit here. I don't know if we have an hour's worth of the CFL week 19 stuff to talk about, but I will just say, like, to the Mike Mitchells of the world, like, we were watching the Jets game yesterday, and everyone hates the Jets. So I said, at least they talk about the Jets. Like, no one talks about the Commanders. We don't like the Commanders. We don't talk. At least you talk. I mean, at least the Jets, are on, Skip Bayless and whatever every day. So Jason, let's get into this. Did we learn? So from the standings, Lions were able to hold up that. I got a little worried there. We'll get into all that stuff, but what did we lock in here? Alouettes home victory. Like what was the playoff implications coming out of the weekend?
So with Hamilton picking up the loss on Friday night, they are locked into third in the East. So Montreal is going to be hosting that East semifinal against Hamilton. So basically, the East is all set, and then in the West, Calgary keeps its playoff hopes alive. They're very much alive with 2 games left in the season. Saskatchewan has one more win right now, but they only have one more game remaining. So Calgary technically controls its own destiny, but they have a couple of really tough games against BC and Winnipeg the last couple of weeks of the season. So we'll have to see how it plays out.
So they would have to win out then. Let me get the schedule up here. So Calgary at BC, but obviously BC wants to maintain, right? They don't want to drop. I mean,
Yeah.
is BC hoping that Edmonton comes in and plays spoiler? Is that kind of where we're at?
Yeah, exactly. Winnipeg has to lose the last 2 games, and BC has to win this game on Friday night against Calgary to have any shot at first. And Calgary still could make it if even if they lose against BC on Friday night, because now with the win on Friday, they have the tiebreaker over Saskatchewan. So if Saskatchewan loses this weekend and Calgary loses as well, Calgary would just have to beat Winnipeg the last week of the season in order to make the playoffs. So Calgary, big victory on Friday.
It just feels like Saskatchewan's really running on fumes right now. Is that how you, Evan? Is that how you take it? It seems like the ride. To me, this is far more juice here. With Tiger Cats going into Montreal here and potentially playing upset. I don't think BC has any issue taking care of either of these teams right now. It seems very lost.
Yeah, well, I mean, for a long time I was saying Saskatchewan, like they had things figured out. They weren't anything special, but at the same time, like they were able to get the job done, and they were 6-5 at one point. They were above 500, I believe, at one time, but now they've lost 6 games straight. And even that, going into that Calgary game when they had lost 5 straight, I suppose, I wasn't too concerned still about them. I thought, Calgary again is still the slower team, and they won't have a problem with that. And we'll get into that game because to me that was probably the most impactful one of the week without a doubt. But yeah, they didn't. And now you're kind of you've kind of hit the panic button. I think if you're a Saskatchewan fan, everything was kind of fine. Things were going along as usual. Your playoff spot. It didn't look like, again, like there just wasn't that much competition, but you start racking up these losses late in the season, and in a 21-week season, that can continue for a long time. Now Saskatchewan's at a point where, like they really gotta tighten in here in the past couple games. But I think what's honestly just in the bigger picture a bit disappointing is, we're talking about the way I'm phrasing this. If you were somebody who didn't know the records, you think that this would be like, Bills Chiefs fighting for a playoff spot. But really, it's more like, I don't know. I dare bring up examples in the NFL, but it's just,
It's like when the Buccaneers was playing the Panthers last year and they were trying to win the NFC South, right?
That's
You're
a good
like,
one.
if the Buccaneers get 7-9 here, they can win the division and go.
Yeah, I mean, it's a pretty tough battle being fought when both of these teams haven't even reached the 7-win mark yet. And we've been watching both of these teams all season. And, I've been saying all along, that last playoff spot was going to come down to Saskatchewan or Calgary. But it's very interesting. Again, we're sitting here this late in the season, and you never think you would say this given how things were just a couple weeks ago. But I think a lot of people would rather see Edmonton in the playoffs now over both of those teams, and that's a very interesting takeaway. I know Matt Dunnigan was talking about that, on the panel during halftime of this game on TSN, just talking about, Edmonton honestly has more momentum, even though they've been eliminated, than really either of those teams. He was kind of laying in the Calgary more at the time because that was the must-win game for them, and they were down at half. But yeah, Saskatchewan clearly is kind of in the same boat now. So it's tough. It's tough because, to be honest, like, it'll be interesting to see who gets the spot at the end of the day. A couple of interesting things now could happen here down the stretch. But let's be honest, like either one of those teams, the Lions are just kind of sitting there. Like, I mean, I hate to sound disrespectful, and I, again, all due respect to Calgary and Saskatchewan, but, to BC, like, for all intensive purposes, it's almost a bye week for them, in a way. It's just kind of like, well, we're going to have a home game, someone's going to come in, and I understand anything can happen, right? I mean, the second I say that, everybody, gets excited, and, there's a different level of energy. So I certainly hope that, if I say something like that, then maybe one of those teams will go in there with a different energy and make the game competitive. I don't know, but yeah, I understand BC's, had their struggles and they've lost some games they should have won, whatever. But I don't know, man. If BC, I'll just say this, before we actually get into the games here, what was I gonna say? I mean, I don't know. If BC were to lose this game and we see potentially Saskatchewan or Calgary, in the West final, that would be, I don't know. I I don't know. That would be something. That would be really something. One of those teams against Winnipeg. I mean, I feel like Saskatchewan would have the best chance of taking down BC and pulling what would be the upset of the year and then going into Winnipeg. But I don't know. I mean, I'm 99% certain BC is going to win that game, but you can never leave it off the table.
Well, and just especially with, and no disrespect to Rick Campbell and everything. We've talked about this. It hasn't always felt like the Lions are always like showing up to all these games 100%. I think the Bills were a little sleepy last night. It's the Giants, whatever. And as I break my microphone here, I hope the Commanders don't feel that way next week as well, taking on the Giants. But it's interesting you're talking about, there's one of the Twitter accounts like Jacques Cartier or whatever follows me, and has advocated we get Trey Ford and kind of get the leftovers. We'll do the traveling team and all of that because it did. And we'll talk the Elks here, but like Kevin Brown coming on the show last week, who I thought, delightful man, was so on time. I do all these. We've had a lot of player interviews lately where it's like, hey, it's going to be at noon Pacific. I'm like, okay. So I get on there. Nothing. Did I text the people that are trying to set it up, not the player, like, okay, let me get in touch with them. And then they're like, oh, you want to do that now? Like, oh, okay. Is that video? Okay. Like, okay, hang on. Like, next thing you know, it's like 1:45. And I'm like, I work from home, but I've devoted 2 hours to getting this, whatever. Kevin Brown, 12:59. He's sitting there, 1 o'clock login, like he's ready to go. So I appreciate that. And he had a day, but he was talking a lot of, we have a lot of momentum right now going in, and we're playing this like we have a lot to play for next year and a lot to prove. So I like that. I mean, Edmonton and this game where they're coming into Winnipeg next week, like, I don't take it off the table. I mean, Winnipeg is really, really good, but I do feel like Edmonton's got a head of steam right now. At least, I know the records and standings, all that stuff. But Jason, any other thoughts on that before we get into the games? I know they blew whatever. I was trying to look up the lead they blew against Montreal, but overall, it feels like they have a little bit more going.
Yeah, I mean, I do think Edmonton in general has looked the best of those three teams, Calgary, Saskatchewan, and Edmonton, the last half of the season. But at the end of the day, Edmonton made its own bed with how they started the season. And I think that even lately, they've had a couple of very disappointing games. I thought that, we'll get into it, but the 21-3 blown lead, I think it was 21-3 lead that they blew in this game, and they blew it within one quarter too. So they had the lead at the end of the first quarter, and then they blew it by halftime. So, I mean, I don't feel too bad for Edmonton. I just wish we could have like a 2-game series between BC and Winnipeg to decide first place in the West.
Yeah, a bigger blown lead, the 21-3 the Edmonton had, or Colorado, was it 29-0, and the QB's tweeting or posting on Instagram his merchandise links at halftime. I'm like, this is anyway. So let's get into this. Ottawa, nothing to play for at all. Led for a good portion of this game. Toronto, still putting up the 40 burger. Chad Kelly in the game for a lot of this. Duke's looking good. Evan, what did you make of this? Like, because I'm sitting there watching the score come down. I'm like, this is crazy. Like, I don't know, Ottawa has just looked like doo-doo here for a while. What did you make?
Yeah, I mean, this was a game I actually expected Ottawa to win. But at the same time, I didn't realize, Toronto's got this thing going on where it's like they don't pull all their starters, but at the same time, they're working other guys in. So you kind of get this mixed bag of like the team that we've seen all season, and then sort of like more like a preseason element where you're just testing depth and all that. But I really expected Ottawa to win this game. And, it's another – I understand you have nothing to play for, but it would be nice to, go – into Toronto and, play the best team in the league and get a win, just for the sort of culture and moral victory more than anything. But they weren't able to do that. Toronto still scored 40 points, with only some of their starters really in for a majority of the game. So that was a bit of a red flag. I didn't catch too much of this game. I know, on the Ottawa side, they had some guys, worked in, like Tyrell Pigrome at quarterback. They were kind of testing some things out too. From what I heard, a lot of lost fumbles in this game. Seemed like there was a bit of a ball control issue, between Crum and Pigrome. I think there might have been 3 lost fumbles or something like that. So Toronto, definitely getting some work in there. One of the interesting storylines for me in this game, that's very kind of niche, but I'll bring it up anyway. Elijah McGee, whose rights were claimed by the Roughnecks in the XFL. This was his first game in Ottawa. I believe he was on the practice roster before this and got called up for this game and, registered a tackle. So good to see that. Could be a well, I don't even know if I can say XFL guy anymore in the future. UFL guy, NSFL guy, I don't know, but could be a part of that pool later on. So, keep an eye on guys like that, and who knows, maybe a couple of these other American guys will be too. I'm sure I'll get some heat for saying that, but oh well. On the Toronto side, yeah, Chad Kelly again. Even though you could argue like he maybe shouldn't be playing at this point in the season, still went out there and put on a decent game, throwing to, some different guys like Richie Sindani getting worked in there, Tommy Neal, Deontay McMahon, again, having a decent, scoring a touchdown, he's getting worked in. That's nice to see, somebody that I know personally. So, obviously always take that to heart. But yeah, other than that, not too much to talk about in terms of this game. Just really, Toronto, I think, had Ottawa had a very strong first half. I'll say that because I watched a bit of the first half. I think they put up like 24 or something like that. And then Toronto just kind of came out swinging in the third quarter, 14 points. And then Ottawa didn't score at all in the fourth. And then by that point, it was just kind of out of reach. So it's too bad, a team like that, again, I know you have nothing to play for, and a lot of people don't care about that game. But if I'm an Ottawa fan, it's like, well, let's just, have a bit of fun in these last couple weeks. But losing a game like that, I wouldn't necessarily say is fun, especially when you had a big lead and think you only had, 3 points total in the second half. So, yeah, I mean, again, as we said before, a lot of work to be done in Ottawa. We'll see what they do in the offseason in terms of, coaches and some of their key positions. But yeah, I think they've got some work to do for sure.
In terms of, and I want to get Jason's thoughts on the quarterback stuff here for Toronto, but yeah, just looking at Ottawa, late bye here. I got that week 20 bye we're looking forward to, and then hosting Toronto again. So I mean, clearly, not the greatest there. In terms of this Chad Kelly thing, Jason, why can't we see? I know Brian came in and didn't play great. Why aren't we giving these backups a little bit more? I just don't understand putting Chad in any harm's way at all right now.
I think it's mostly just because, this was their last home game of the season. They still, unlike a lot of teams, they still have 2 games left. So they have a game at Saskatchewan and then at Ottawa, as you just said. So I think they're going to have the backups play the vast majority, if not all, of those games the last 2 weeks of the season. So I don't think I'm too concerned yet. But yeah, it is kind of confusing that they have played them basically the whole game for a couple of these games the last couple of weeks, and we'll have to see how they manage that the last couple of weeks, but I think that's what their plan is.
I thought it was interesting, and I had on was Eddie Steele 2 weeks ago. We were talking about, hey, the resting people and these, all this stuff that's been going on, and hey, how do you prepare for this? And Eddie's like, they got the first round bye, right? You're playing. To think that you got to get up for one home game and then be in the playoffs he's like, that's not an issue at all. He's like, I would have no concern at all. You could rest everybody. They you'd have the kind of the double bye going into that, because I don't think they're playing. You're missing the semifinals. You're playing at home against Ottawa the week before that. I just thought it was interesting where he's talking about just, from a player point of view, because we sit here and talk a lot about that kind of stuff. How did Ottawa look by your eyes, Jason? Like I said, not a lot playing for here. What did you make?
Well, it was kind of deja vu to the last game that we saw between these two teams, or the previous game between these two teams this season, where Ottawa had one of their better offensive showings of the year, but again, they just could not stop anyone defensively. And, they had a really strong first half offensively, Dustin Crum and company, but ultimately they fizzled out in the second half, like Evan was saying. And I think at the end of the day, Ottawa just still has a ton to work on if they're going to beat a team like Toronto. They have not beat an Eastern opponent this season, and I think that is the most telling stat about their season so far.
We'll go Evan first. In terms of when Farhan was on last week and we've talked and Bob Dice and all that stuff, Farhan doesn't expect Sean Burke to go, the GM there, or Bob Dice to go. Farhan expects kind of a minimal change there. Does that surprise you, Evan? And then we'll get Jason's thoughts.
Yes and no. I mean, in a league like the CFL, the pool of guys that you can pick from in terms of replacements is very thin. And I listened to the show that you had last week with Farhan, and I did agree, to an extent about a lot of the things that he was saying with some of these questionable situations, not just with Ottawa, but with Edmonton and, all the other teams that have struggled, Calgary, like you could, kind of clean house and just, do a rebuild. But in Ottawa's position specifically, they've been rebuilding for so long that if you just keep changing things up, you're almost delaying the progress. So I think even if they are, dissatisfied with the results from this year, I mean, again, if you just bring new guys in, I mean, then you're essentially like, it takes so long to get that going. It's like, well, would next year even count? Because then you got to retool everything. And I don't know. I think they're just trying to stay afloat right now more than anything. And, that's tough. It's a difficult spot. I don't think it's what a lot of fans want to see. I mean, we often, push for change and things like that very quickly, but I think the CFL, you kind of got to pace yourself, because you look around and it's like the amount of experienced guys who could come in and make, an immediate impact right away. It's not a very big group, because in the NFL, you've got 32 teams to pick from in terms of, coaching hires and things like that. Like, who do I want? Who's done a good job this year? In the CFL, there's not that many, there's 9 teams. And let's say, only 4 or 5 of those teams have actually done well this season, that's even less, right? So I don't know, like, I understand, like, it should be surprising, but I'm not surprised, just because, like, I understand the approach, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And I agree with it.
It's hard, like, like the Commanders won yesterday against the Falcons, and obviously, but you always want the win, but I'm like, man, if the Commanders just sunk all season, and then, Ron Rivera gets embarrassed with the new ownership, they're like, you almost hope, because when you're in this kind of perennial, like you said, rebuilding, of like, well, we're kind of always, I felt like that was the Raiders for years, and like, we're kind of with Derek Carr, and we're always kind of going to be in the playoffs, but, even if we make it to the playoffs, you're not going to win. You're talking about the kind of the number of people out there eligible to sign. And I mean, even just for this, remember we had Toronto extending Corey Mace this week, where I think Jason, and I think we were talking in the chat, like, this is someone that very much could have been a head coach somewhere, right? Toronto locking him down. Thoughts on that, and kind of the question about the REDBLACKS coaching staff?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I don't think this signing of a defensive coordinator, the extension, I don't think it prevents him from being a head coach next season necessarily. So I think there's always outs to, if a team wants to hire him as a head coach. So that's something to keep in mind. But I don't think with Ottawa that, I think they're just kind of lost as an organization right now, because, they've changed all the players a couple of off seasons ago. They've had terrible luck with injuries in terms of the, Jeremiah Mazzoli of it all and everything like that. But I think at the end of the day, I don't think that Bob Dice is it as a head coach. I think Sean Burke has done some good things in terms of, replenishing the cup board there, because when he, took hold of this job, that roster was so far behind the rest of the CFL back in, 2021 when he got hired. So I think he's done a good job of making this team more competitive, but ultimately they're not getting the right decisions, like in order to win the games. And I think that, they're still not as talented as a lot of teams around the CFL. I think, their skill position players lag behind the rest of the CFL for the most part. So I think that, it's hard to say what the problem is in Ottawa, if it's the, coaching, or is it, just the general lack of talent. But they've tried both. They've tried switching up the coaches. They've tried switching up the players, and none of it seems to be working. So I'm very interested to see what they do this offseason. But as to whether whether or not they will make a change, I'm with Farhan. I don't think that they're going to make a change in terms of the GM or head coaching spot, just because of the coach's operations cap aspects involved.
It's just funny. I remember it was going into last year, and they were doing that behind the R, and they were doing the documentary stuff, and we had Mazzoli, and okay, we got a big surprise coming, and we're signing Mazzoli and all that. And then just to kind of see this, kind of spiral down. Evan, weren't we talking in the chat like the Argos have more wins this year than the Ottawa has since like their Grey Cup win or some craziness like that? I mean, it's just remarkable statistics. What did you make of that, Evan? That was a couple days ago.
Yeah, well, it's tied now. Now that Toronto beat Ottawa, they're 14-2. Ottawa is now 14-53, I think, over the past 3 or 4 seasons, something like that, which is an incredible stat. That is, it's an incredibly sad stat, I should say. I feel really bad. And Ottawa, I was saying going into this season, keep in mind, this is, months ago now, like half a year ago, I was saying like, and even last year, because the whole behind the R thing, which I thought was great. And I'll just, pivot here for a quick moment and say that, the CFL has some great content when it comes to, media and documentary type. Like I know BC had one this year, I believe, on their YouTube channel. Ottawa had, the behind the R stuff. There was a couple others, but, things like that, I think really, like I enjoy watching those, and, that's like they're very well thought out, and, they do like, it's like, I don't know, for, again, considering, how many things the CFL could improve on that we all know about, the fact that they've, done well and at least presenting something to the fans like that, I think is good. But anyways, like I was saying, with Ottawa, this season, even last season, I was saying like this has to be the year of change, and I'm not saying that if they do bad, in one of those years, whether it was last season or this season, that you clean house. I didn't say that, but like this franchise has struggled for so long. And I feel like a lot of our attention, was put on to Edmonton this season just because they had the slower start, and Ottawa, there was a moment like they beat Winnipeg, they had Dustin Crum. Things did look really good, and I feel like I say that every week. There was a time where it did look promising, and I was like, okay, I'm not sure if, they're back or whatever you want to say, but I feel like they've at least made some progress. But yeah, here we are at the end of the season, and I'm like, well, we're kind of just right back to square one, another season with like 4 wins. And I excuse me, I don't know. Like, I just feel, if I'm a fan of that team, I would feel lost. I don't know where you go, and it kind of feels like you've done everything you can in terms of a rebuild to make things right, and really the only thing you could do is get rid of some jobs, but that's not going to help, because who are you going to replace them with? So you're kind of just sitting there hoping. You're hoping that things are going to turn around. There has to be a lot of hope, and that's not a very concrete substance to put all your chips in. We use the term pushing all your chips into the table like you're playing a poker game or something. Like that's not the best approach, but like it's kind of all they have. I mean, you think about you brought up the behind the R thing, and the whole like that documentary there was a lot of outlets in that documentary series, but the one thing that they really focused on and built it around was the addition of Jeremiah Masoli being our new franchise quarterback. And I don't know how many games specifically Jeremiah Masoli has played in an Ottawa REDBLACKS uniform, but it's not many. It's not nearly 5. Okay. Yeah, across 2 seasons, keep in mind. Not even 1 season, across 2 seasons. And that's that's a frightening thought, given that, out of, how many, I mean, that's 5 out of, if I can do math, 36 regular season games. Yeah, that's an abysmal, number. So again, really unfortunate. Those were things that were out of their control. And, something, this season, I know you have to leave some things in the past, but sometimes I still think about, what happened with him and Garrett Marino in Saskatchewan, and how that was almost a domino effect for, how things have gone up to this point. Because I understand, like, his injuries this season were separate. It was a separate thing. He came back from that, but got injured again. However, you can't help but thinking, like, what if that just never happened last year and they just kind of kept on that trajectory? I mean, I still don't think personally they would have been an elite team, but I feel like, they still could have gotten into that sort of, where like the Ticats are at right now, where you're like 8 wins, like you're, almost at 500, like looking at the playoffs. Like I feel like they had enough to do that, but when you don't have the direction and the stability, things fall apart really quickly. So I'll stop rambling on about it. There are a lot of thoughts that I have around that. Ottawa is one of the teams where I've been pulling for them for a long time, even more maybe than Edmonton and a couple of these other franchises that, would like to turn things around. Like going into this season, Montreal and Saskatchewan, I think were 2 big teams, with question marks given the shakeups there. I won't get into those now, but my point being, Ottawa, all I can do now is hope. I'm hoping that in 2024, they make the right decisions. Like, I know people in their personnel department. I trust Sean Burke and all those guys to make the right decisions. You have to hope people don't get injured, and you have to hope that maybe your game management and certain decisions gets better from the coaching side, and you just have to carry on. I mean, there's nothing much else you can do at a certain point. So it's a tough spot, but you do have to keep hope alive to some degree.
Just remember, for every Ottawa REDBLACKS loss out there, Jenna, a longtime listener of the show, is upset. Jenna's a long time diehard REDBLACKS fan. Jason, anything else on this? We'll get to the other game. I think we've done good padding this out a little bit because I'm like, I don't know, we're gonna get, but we're good now. We're 32 minutes in. We'll knock through these other games. Jason, any other thoughts, REDBLACKS or Toronto?
Yeah, I just wanted to hammer home the point again that this team has not won a single game against the East Division this year. They've been actually very, competitive against the West. They've had wins over Winnipeg, Calgary, Saskatchewan, but other than that, like they have not been able to, beat the East Division, and I think that's the main source of their problems.
So let's get into this, and I got a couple little tweets here to pull up. Montreal Alouettes, like we said, Edmonton dropping the 21-3. I had a tweet here, Dave Campbell talking. In the last 9 games, the Elks have held a 22-point lead over Winnipeg, 15-point lead in the fourth quarter on Labor Day, an 18-point lead over the Alouettes, and blew them all and lost. That's 7 wins. If the Edmonton Elks hang on, out a win or 2 earlier, that's 8 and 9. Really tremendous here. Jason, we'll go to you first. What did you make of this? I know we talked a little bit already, but Edmonton dropping, Montreal rolling back and having the big comeback from behind.
Yeah, I was really excited for Edmonton in this game, like the way it started, and like this is great. Like they could finish their season. They're they have 1 game next week against Winnipeg, but that's on the road. They could finish their home slate with a big win here. They'd have 3 home wins on the season, but ultimately they just fell apart completely in that second quarter. And I mean, Montreal just their pride just kind of kicked in, even though Montreal had no need to win this game with Hamilton losing on Friday. I mean, I just think their pride kind of kicked in and they just started playing like we know they can against these losing teams of the CFL this season. So I think at the end of the day, the Alouettes just showing that they're the better team of these 2 teams, regardless of the situation, much like Toronto beating Ottawa. So, I mean, I don't have too many takeaways from this game.
I had a clip here, just talking, and we always. I hope the sound doesn't play here. We always get, friends of the show and all this, and we saw Kevin Brown here coming back, just having a tremendous leaping performance on that. I did like to see that, even in the loss. I always like to see friends of the show here coming back. I mean, look at this guy just cartwheel over. I don't know. Kevin Brown is a spark plug. A big fan of him, and good to see him featured on that. Evan, thoughts on the game?
Yeah, so, for me, this game, it was a couple things. Again, I wanted Edmonton to win this game because I know they can do it. But as Dave's pointed out, while this team has had a lot of momentum in the second half of the season, they've looked a lot better, things like that. The one kind of disappointment, I think, of this resurgence has been the second half. They've blown a lot of big leads, and I always think about that one at Edmonton. I think it was, Trey Ford's like first or second game in the starting lineup, and
Winnipeg,
yeah, they completely whiffed, for lack of a better term. So yeah, it was a bit disappointing, and Edmonton came out strong. In the first quarter they had 14 points. It looked good, but I mean, Montreal with 23 in the second, I think that's going to be hard for any team to come back from, and especially Edmonton, who, has struggled with, sort of these, you jump out to a lead and then you can't really get back in it. In terms of individual performances, I'll start on the Edmonton side. Trey Ford looked decent. this was a decent game for him, I'd say. Nothing special, not one of his games where, it was a blow your socks off kind of, how does he do that type of performance? But it was respectable. Again, something that Edmonton can build off of going into the offseason. And, like you pointed out, Reed, with Kevin Brown, clearly I think that is where the mental focus of this team is right now. Like, hey, we can't win any games for an actual playoff spot, but we can still win games to, feel better about ourselves and put points on the board to, have something to build off of. So yeah, I think Trey Ford looked good. Kevin Brown had a catch for 22 yards on top of, he didn't do a lot, but 6.8 yards per carry. I'll take that. And then Trey Ford got in a bit there on the running action too. Kyron Moore for me in this game stood out with the 2 receiving touchdowns. He's somebody that I don't know. There's a lot of guys I haven't talked about this season, but Kyron Moore I want to bring up here late, in the last couple weeks. He came over from Saskatchewan, and he's been silently one of the better receivers, I think, or return guys, at least, specialists in the league. I wouldn't say he's elite by any means, but again, another one of those pieces in Edmonton where it's like he's definitely helped a significant amount. And maybe part of the reason he hasn't gotten the attention is just because of all the other turmoil that's gone on in Edmonton this season. And a lot of stuff is directed on Trey Ford, as we know, especially over the past couple weeks with him starting. So things like that. Geno Lewis was the leading receiver in this game who, to be honest, I don't know. I expected bigger things from him this year. I thought he was really going to be the difference maker at Edmonton, and I think people in their personnel department would probably think the same, just given his stature. And, going into this season, I think we sung his praises as being the best receiver in the league. And, while he is still one of the top options, that any team would love to have, I think there's a couple guys this season that have done better, and that have proved that he might not have the crown anymore. Austin Mack, I think, being one of them, even if he's, slowing down now as well. A couple others, I won't name all of them. But on the Montreal side of the ball, it was a good game for Montreal. This was a game where for them, again, like they've got the home playoff game secured. You're feeling okay. Like this whole thing about, them not being able to beat winning teams, but you can beat all the teams with the losing record. Like this wasn't any different for them. Like, as much as I'm saying, Edmonton had a shot at winning or whatever, like Montreal still beat him, but Edmonton still has the losing records. So it's like, he still doesn't really tell anything for anybody, but it was a good game for them. I think, for Montreal, this is the game where, you're just trying to build momentum going into the playoffs. Again, you're not really playing for anything either, but you have work that needs to be done later on that the other team doesn't. And, I feel like this was a pretty complete game for them, all things considered. Fajardo, I feel like had again, outside of the turnover, which is what we always seem to point out about him. Outside of that, if you take that off the board, I think he had a good game. In the run department, Walter Fletcher, not somebody that we talk about a lot, but a guy that's getting brought up here late in the season, 13 carries for 88 yards, close to averaging 7 per touch. A lot of the discussion, has obviously been around Will Stanback and Jess Renantwi as of late, but, good to see Fletcher getting worked in there. It's fun at the end of the season, when you've got these teams sort of working in other players that you might not have seen as much. And even if you're not really playing for something, it can be fun. This is a period of evaluation in the CFL. Teams are deciding, who do we want to keep, going into next year, what does that look like? Talking about the window for practice roster expansion opens, things like that. So, those are evaluation periods or a telltale sign of them. I don't know if there's too much else. Austin Mack, is getting back. Like he's been quiet for a couple weeks, I feel like, but 5 catches for 57 yards in this game. Tyler Snead, again, someone that's really come along in the second half of the season. Personally, though, the guy I'm really excited about in the playoff matchup with Hamilton is Tyson Philpott, because he's been flashing a lot as of lately. Young guy, Canadian. I'm really excited to see, what he can do. Obviously season's nearly over, but that game against Hamilton specifically, I feel like, if Montreal really wants to, make a statement, I guess he would be the one to kind of come in, and that seems to be his time, at least in my mind. So, other than that, not too much about this game. and it wasn't really meaningful for either team. But 23-point second quarter by Montreal certainly can't be overlooked.
Yeah, it's funny you're talking Montreal, like being able to play. Jason's side about this, they'll kind of like win against the teams. It's like having I have X-ray vision, but I can only see through like wood or something. Like it's not quite, it's kind of like a weird. But you're talking, we're talking Eugene Lewis and all that, like you said. They got, because I was looking at his contract here, a ton of money onto that, and that was what made always made like the Cornelius thing even weirder on that, where it's like, okay, we're gonna sign this guy, highest non-paid quarterback, and then sticking with Taylor Cornelius and all of that. My last thought, we'll get to Jason. I did like, and I'm not the biggest, obviously like football expert, right? You guys are, that's why we talk about it, but having Kevin Brown say on the show, like, yeah, I thought I started the season really slow. I felt like I was thinking too much. I finally now more comfortable. Like, I also thought you started. Like, I was like, yeah, I could see that when he was playing. Like, it felt good to kind of have him vocalize that, because I remember watching these games and thinking like something's not mashing at that point. Jason, any thoughts on that or anything else from this game?
Yeah, absolutely. I thought that, Kevin Brown, the production the first half of the season did not match his talent. And I thought that, the way he finished last year, I was like, this guy could be, a top 3 running back in the CFL. And that's what he's become by the end of this season as well. So, I mean, really happy to see that from him. And then just a couple of things from the Montreal perspective. I really think that Danny Machocha, the GM over there, deserves a lot of credit for restocking the Canadian talent on this roster. I mean, you see a lot of impact Canadian players that, they drafted really high. Marc-Antoine Dequoy was a second-round pick. Should have been a first-round pick, but he had NFL interest. Tyson Philpott, a really talented receiver. Luwal Ugawak, I probably butchered that name, but he's was the first-round pick this year. Went to TCU, did not play a ton at TCU. It was kind of a backup there, but the Alouettes took a chance on him. The high pedigree he had playing at a big school, and he's paid off so far with he had a big strip sack in this one that led to a touchdown, and that really swung the game. So I think the Alouettes, that's been a big part of the resurgence over the past couple of years, is their Canadian talent, because before the last couple of years, I thought they had probably the weakest Canadian talent in the league.
Well, and this was, remember, supposed to be the big, come down. Okay, everyone left Montreal, and we got the new owner here. We've had all the Gary Stern and everything. And here they are. I mean, it's, it's second in the East. I mean, you got to qualify everything. But I mean, I think this could be a lot worse off for the Alouettes right now. Don't you think, Jason?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, still 10-win season, chance for 11, right?
Anything else on this one? We'll power through the last 2 games here. Anything else? No. All right. So let's get into this. I'll toss back to Jason first. I'm going to pull up a photo here. But any thought? We've talked a little bit about this, Saskatchewan and Calgary and everything else. What did you make of this game specifically?
The first half of this game was so ugly. And I think, was it you, Evan, that said in the group chat that Calgary just wants their season to be over? It was just like Saskatchewan was playing like that too. I felt like, both of these teams did not win the game. I thought that Calgary, didn't they have like a 2-score lead going into halftime? But I think at the end of the day, they didn't look too great either. And then really it was just the turnovers in the second half that swung it in Calgary's direction. I think the turnover differential was 5-0 in favor of Calgary. So ultimately, that's just your game right there. Saskatchewan, I think, outgained them, passing yards, rushing yards. But ultimately, at the end of the day, they gave Calgary some short fields, and Calgary was able to capitalize.
I just wanted to give a shout out, to cover. We've had our feuds with 3 Down and all of that. Got to hang out, covers the Stampeders. Got to hang out with a little bit of Ryan Ballantyne down in Vegas. So I had a good time with that. Hooked him up with some good. I guess his son is a big Vegas Golden Knights fan because of I don't understand. I'm like, okay, well, you're obviously Calgary fans. Huge fan. But anyway, we met up for a beer. Really fun to see that. I don't think that the Stamps season has worked out the way that he probably wanted it to. But they're getting the W here. Like I said, we're keeping it alive. I don't know for what regard. Jason or Evan, thought, you know what I mean? Like, okay, if we got to win out, but then we're still gonna just get into the buzzsaw at BC. What did you make of this?
Well, when I brought up the whole thing of it feels like Calgary just wants to lose, I think Farhan was the one that mentioned that on your show last week. Like, that locker room is just kind of out, but regardless of, everything that I had heard and everything that I expected, this was kind of like my game of the week, for lack of a better term. This was the game where I sat down and I'm like, I don't care what happens. I'm going to watch all 4 quarters. And by halftime, I almost regretted that. I was like, oh yeah, this is one of those games. Like this is yeah, it wasn't looking good. But then second half, got really interesting. Like it looked like, I mean, I was ready at half, and again, the panelists were saying the same thing, and Farhan was on the panel that night. It just felt like, I mean, you could have ended the game there. That's what it was. The whole vibe, it was like you could have just ended it there, and Saskatchewan would have just, closed the door, and the West would have been all, but locked up. But then the second half rolled around, and then suddenly, like, all these things started happening. I credit Calgary's defense more than anybody for this win, because they really, I think the most pivotal play of the game. There were a couple, nice throws here and there by Mayer. The one specifically to Luther Hakunavanu was incredible, and I tagged Luther in a tweet and I said, this is good. I'm glad I stuck around for this, because that was one hell of a grab. But specifically their defense, I think the most pivotal moment in the game for me was Calgary had scored on an offensive touchdown. Saskatchewan gets the ball back. First play, Jake Dolgala throws a pick six. And I'm like, and that tied the game at 19. And I was like, okay, like now we're in business. And you can feel, like, I'm sure we've all experienced this watching football, but you can feel when there's a momentum shift.
Yeah,
and when a
the
team
Big Mo.
Exactly. And you feel like that's the moment where if you're Calgary, you're like, okay, like now we have to win. Like we've been gifted all this, like we have to win. Like something, like it's just, again, it's the feeling like you've got, season on the line, you're in front of your home crowd. Like it's just the classic, like, it's a must-win game. And in that moment, you can tell that they were going to pull out all the stops, for lack of a better term, and just go get the job done. And they did. Somehow they did. Like watching that first half, you would have never guessed it was even going to be possible, but they did it. And I don't know if that's a good or bad thing. I mean, again, right? Like this seems like we're talking about it as if it's some heavyweight matchup, but these teams have a combined 11 wins. So I don't know. Like it's nothing, spectacular, but it was a good. It ended up being a good game, and I'm glad. That second half in particular, at least if you're a Calgary fan, I think you feel good. That was some of the better football that you've seen all season from a team that we have called, stale and sluggish and really just not exciting. I mean, hell, I know there's other teams in the league that have a worse record. Take Ottawa and Edmonton as the two examples. They really are the only other teams in the league that have a worse record. To some degree, depending on which point in the season we're talking about, I would prefer to watch those teams over Calgary at any given point in their season, just because Calgary, like, I forget the specific stat, but, TSN had some graphic that popped up during the game, and it was like Calgary, like, I don't think they were maybe like 1-9 during the season at games where they were down at half. And I was like, so it really is like a 1/2 type of season for them, but not in this one. And this one was the one that mattered, and in football, sometimes like it really, I mean, we were talking about, the Bills-Giants game, like no matter how bad or ugly that game was, like it just came down to the final play. Like that is your game, and that's where it's important to capitalize and do the right thing. It all comes down to that one moment, just like for Calgary. It all comes down to this one game to keep the season alive. Yes, you've had a lot of, bad things, and it hasn't been pretty, and there's been so many ups and downs, but you're sitting there and you still have a chance. You maybe shouldn't have a chance. The fact that, yeah, we're in week 19 and they're still fighting for a playoff spot is incredible, but that's the CFL sometimes, just given the number of teams and the way that the divisions are laid out. But overall, I'm happy for Calgary. I was pulling for them in this game just to make it interesting. Again, whether or not either of those teams should be in the playoffs, I'm sure if you're a Roughriders or Stamps fan, you're like, you're probably sitting there thinking, yes, like we are, but even some of their fans, I feel like, know that, it's kind of a fluke to some extent, just given what's happened this season in terms of, their level of competition, everything like that. But overall, happy for Calgary. And yeah, it'll be an interesting couple of weeks now to see who can get that spot, because I mean, now, like, both teams are still in it. Like, keep in mind, like, yeah, Saskatchewan lost, but that doesn't necessarily mean like Calgary gets the automatic bid. Like Saskatchewan could still very well be in it, and things go on as I thought they would. But we'll see. It keeps it going for another couple weeks, and to be talking about interesting scenarios like that in the final 2 weeks of the regular season or whatever in the CFL. Don't know if you always get that, so I'm pleased.
No. Talking to Giants Bills, if it was the CFL, you could have reviewed that. You could challenge that holding call at the end there. This is my impression. We'll get to Jason. This is my impression of Evan still watching Calgary, Saskatchewan at 6:30 Pacific on a Friday. It's just like I'm still in this. It's still real to me. Damn it. Jason, thoughts on this? We'll talk your Ticats here before we get out of here. Any other thoughts on Calgary or any of this?
Yeah, I'll say this is that, at least we have something to watch for over the last couple of weeks standing wise, because I think this is really, besides, the long shot that BC still catches Winnipeg for first place in the West. This is really the only thing left to decide in the CFL standings besides maybe the number one pick for the CFL draft. But I think that's important for the CFL to have something meaningful the last couple of weeks. So we get that with the result of this game. One thing with Calgary, I thought that our offense looked really, really poor throughout this game. Besides that last, final drive that that catch by Luther Akunavanu, that was a nice drive. But besides that, they really didn't generate too many yards. Look at the running statistics, just a really pathetic day for them. And that's one thing that's really perplexed me about their season. This is a team that was first in rushing in each of the last 2 seasons in the CFL, and they've completely dropped off. I think they're like 8th or 9th in rushing, or 7th or 8th or something like that in rushing. I know BC's last, but at the end of the day, the Calgary offense just continues to frustrate me. But at the end of the day, they're still in it.
So let's get here. Last one, hurry up offense here before we get out. Nail biter. I'll just play. My heel promo here. Walking, I was in the bathroom at the Mexican restaurant, getting ready for Adam Sandler, watching Sean White kick the walk-off field goal on my phone on CFL Plus. That's where we're at on here. Cutting my promo to Jason Hussey here because I'm all bull. Like once we win, then I'm like, but I'm just sitting there. I already said at the top of the show, like I'm not going to Grey Cup if this doesn't work out the way we need it to. We'll go Jason, and then we'll go Evan, and then we'll get out of here. Jason, thoughts on this? You feel good about your Ticats? I mean, they're still going to be in third. What did you make of this?
Yeah, I wasn't too hurt by this loss. I thought that the Ticats in general played pretty well. I mean, there was some stuff I didn't like defensively, but it was good to see the offense move it with both of the quarterbacks in there. I mean, Bo had one of the most ugly pick sixes you'll see in the CFL this season on a screen pass early in this game, but I think he bounced back nicely from that, and ultimately it was one of the more enjoyable games to watch in the CFL this season. I was in attendance, and I thought that this game just had a lot of lead changes, and I thought that it was just a really generally clean played game from both sides.
Yeah, I mean, Vernon obviously, had the interception here, but Bo looking good, and Schultz kind of a 1-2 punch there. Interesting. One more question to Jason, then we'll go to Evan. What do you make of how they have moved Bo back into the lineup here?
It's very confusing to me. If they didn't do this last year, I would be even more confused, but I kind of see what they're doing here because they had, Dane Evans and Matthew Schultz last year. And I mean, I think that might be the best way to use Matthew Schultz because clearly he's not a full-time starter in the CFL just because of his injury concerns, but in short dosages, he can be a very effective quarterback. And we've seen that. And I think the big question is, how do they deploy it in the playoffs? Do they give Bo the entire game? Trust their $500,000 man, or do they, give Schultz the reins if Bo struggles early in that game? Only time will tell.
I don't know. I think to take BC here to the wire and have to have that. I mean, it was a lengthy field goal, right, to get out.
Yep.
And, I mean, because I'm like remembering now. Okay, because I drank a lot at the Adam Sandler game. But Vernon got hurt, and Dane came in and moving the field, and I'm this all coming back to my mind now. But I mean, it wasn't to me, I would feel very good about this. I mean, Montreal came in and kind of whipped Edmonton around a little bit in the second half. Ticats took BC, a playoff team, here to the last seconds of the game. I feel good about that. Evan, thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, this surprisingly ended up being one of the better games of the week, in my opinion. I mean, I feel like a lot of people had this game circled. I didn't. I just kind of expected, BC to go in there and to do the job. But Hamilton made it very close. Hamilton continues to prove that they are still, playing at a high level, and they really have come into form as a playoff team in the East. There's no denying that. They are playing, some of the best football that we've seen all season from really any team, in the league, to be honest. It's become, I should say, very fun to watch. So yeah, I mean, ultimately this one came down to a field goal. Hamilton still kind of has their 2-quarterback system in place with Bo Levi and Matt Schultz. But yeah, this was a fun game, and lot of offense in this one. I felt like, I feel like this was two kind of, I don't know. Well, Hamilton, I feel like wasn't an incredible offense until recently somewhat, but BC, we all know, has their great passing game and things of that nature. Really, I mean, I could go into, detail on some of the players here, but I think we all know who performed well in this game. What I really want to focus on, here in the last couple minutes is Dane Evans, coming into that game, just kind of being called up out of nowhere at the most critical moment of the game. Hey, Dane, things are tied. Like, we need to go. Like, you're the guy that's going to, have this drive that puts us in position to win. For him to do that, just come right off the bench and, complete 4 passes in a row and then have the game-winning field goal. I mean, that's a lot easier said than done. Like, most quarterbacks, come into that situation. And I mean, I think about, like Tyson Bagent for the Bears played for the first time yesterday.
Yeah.
First snap for the game. First snap, fumble, return for a touchdown. Like, welcome to the NFL, and I get it. Dane Evans has played before. Tyson Bagent hasn't, so maybe that's not a great comparison. But either way, both guys were kind of suddenly called into action. And as the backup quarterback, I've always said, at any level of the game, that's one of the more interesting positions, like, kicker. There's a couple others, but being the backup quarterback is so interesting because it feels like sometimes you're just, sitting there to kind of coach and listen. And, you kind of, I mean, I look, I haven't been in those shoes, obviously, but, in terms of actual playing time, unless there's a significant injury, backups aren't seeing the field much. But in this case, not only like Dane Evans didn't have to play a majority of the game, but he had to play the most important part. So the fact for him to go out there and do that, and get BC in the position to win, I think that was very, that's a good sign, and hey, Dane, I think, again, well, what made it even more important too is it was his return to Hamilton. The fact that he played snaps in that game against the team that he spent several years with, and kind of made well, I mean, he was there for a while. He did some great things there. Unfortunately, last season was a bit of a disappointment, therefore why he's not still there now. And they've kind of had all these, I mean, they've played 3 different quarterbacks this season, so they've definitely gotten a bit creative there. But for him to go back to Hamilton and to get some playing time, that was good to see. And I know he was tweeting about emotions were definitely running high. It meant a lot to him. And I mean, he got to put the dagger into his old team's heart, which is always an interesting storyline to follow. So
Jason, toss it back to you before we get out of here. Any other thoughts, BC Hamilton?
Yeah, really happy for Dane. I mean, even though it was against Hamilton, I thought that it was pretty cool that he got to come in there. I was like, as soon as I saw him enter the game, I said to my buddy who I was at the game with, I was like, what's going to happen. He's going to drive down the field. And, some stories in sports just write themselves like that. So congratulations to Dane. And then I just want to finish off with a couple of shout outs for both of these teams. Matthew Betts just tied the Canadian sack record in the CFL with 17 sacks, tied Brent Johnson, who played for the BC Lions when he set that record, 17 sacks. And then for Hamilton, Dexter Lawson, who's a defensive back, he had an incredible interception that looked like it was going to be very pivotal towards maybe Hamilton getting a victory in this one in the final 3 minutes. But ultimately, BC was able to regain the lead on that last second field goal. But what an incredible interception. If you guys haven't seen the replay of that, go check that out.
Yeah, friends of the show here. You just can't be a quarterback. Any other position you come on the show, you're probably going to be doing all right. Kevin Brown, even with a loss, played good. Well, we made it. There you go. CFL Week 19 in the books. Got through it. A little NFL. Should be good. Like I said, like and subscribe. I think stuff's coming down this week. XFL, USFL. We'll get through all of that stuff, and then I'll reach out. Maybe we'll get to Winnipeg. Maybe try this week with them having a home game, and then. I think I have a couple ideas for CFL people to come on and talk. So stay tuned for all that. Jason's got his stuff. I was checking out his previews and all your NFL stuff as well. So Evan, thanks as always. We'll see you guys next time.